Now I could actually just look in the mirror, couldn't
You
I?
can actually see everything that's going on,
Fake news, shooby-dooby-dooby-doo. Fake news, shooby-dooby-dooby-doo. Fake news, shooby-dooby-doo-boo. Shooby-dooby-dooby. Fake news, shooby-dooby-dooby-doo. Fake news, shooby-dooby-dooby-doo. Fake news, shooby-dooby-doo-boo. Shooby-dooby-dooby-bomb. Hi there, I'm Peter Batt, and I'm with Murray Challans, and this is Fake News. Fake news, shooby-dooby-dooby-doo. Anyway, so it's been a while again, hasn't it, big boy?
It has been a certain amount of time, yes.
You've cut your hair.
I used to have extraordinarily long hair down to my shoulders, and now I've got this.
I know. Why?
I felt like a change. Winter's coming up, and I just felt my hair was getting in the way. And I know that ideally for winter you should have long hair, but on this particular occasion I decided to go for the short hair.
Okay. Well, that makes absolutely no sense at all.
None.
But probably like the rest of what we're going to say, but you know, who cares really? Today, we're going to talk about power and protest, aren't we? Because it seems to me the democratic process has been taken over by corporate interests and this sort of like bland term of international investors.
Yeah.
You know, these faceless people who apparently have shed loads of money who won't invest in this country or anywhere else unless we're all really docile and just accept everything that comes our way.
Well, it's funny you should talk about being docile, because I think that everyone would agree that democracy is the best way of running society. Possibly not the most efficient, but possibly the best way for everybody involved. And I think what people forget is that if you want to have democracy, you have to expect rich men to get together to subvert that process in their best interests. And I think that really we should all have to assume as good citizens that civil disobedience is an important factor in maintaining a healthy democracy. I mean, that's a good start, isn't it? I'd say that's an assumption that we could...
Well, I think so. I mean, many of our alleged democratic rights grew out of protest movements and civil disobedience. Now we have a situation where a lot of people are concerned about climate change as well as inequality and all of the other issues. And yet our political systems and our politicians are apparently doing nothing about it, and they're still toying with the idea that it's not happening.
I was about to say, not only are they not doing anything about it, but it's all about a commitment at the end of the day. And I think that you've either got a commitment to renewables, which is wind power and solar power, or you've got a commitment to oil. And I think that the fact alone that the government has given licences for fracking, like in and of itself, just says that their commitment to climate change is pretty well much zero.
Indeed,
Even worse, I think that many of them actually believe in climate change, but have actively chosen to do nothing about it.
Yeah, I mean, this goes to the heart of my argument in the book Psychopath Economics, and I'm believing. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, Psychopath available online. Part 2 is actually about the theory of it, and the argument is that we have, as societies become more larger and more complicated, in that you've got this greater division of labour, those at the top actually then lose any sort of like emotional connection with the rest of us, and that's quite a big thing, because they don't then have any sort of like investment other than financial or economic. They have no interest in our welfare. And one of the things that George Monbiot said in the interview I had with him at the Extinction Rebellion protest was that this oligarch, they're actually happy for us to all be fighting amongst ourselves, and
they prefer it that way.
They prefer it that way because actually that increases their power and control. And their short-term aims, in fact probably even their long-term aims, do not coincide with our need to protect the planet's ability to sustain our lives. Yeah. And this is one of the reasons why, if you look at conservative political parties here and in the US and elsewhere, those parties are increasingly taking on a new form of conservatism, which is about protecting and forwarding an oligarch's interests over everyone else. Yeah. They don't actually represent business as such, because small and medium-sized businesses and entrepreneurs are every bit as disposable to them as ordinary people who simply go and work. And consequently, because Conservatives tend to be the beneficiaries of social breakdown, certainly initially, the oligarchs are really getting their way unchallenged. And so the only way, really, to stand up to them, I think, at the moment, is through civil disobedience and public protest.
I fully agree, because it seems to me that you can look at what's happening with big business, and I think you're right. It's not a matter of small to medium-sized enterprises who are the backbone of trade and industry in this country. I think it's, and by oligarchs, we're not talking about certain corporations, we're talking about the men who are at the top, the central bankers, men who are in the very highest form of government, who from my perspective, seem to be colluding in order to take away the power from the public sector.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, where unions are instrumental, I'm not a great union man myself, but I have to have respect for unions for what they have given society. All of the rights the rights that we have as individuals in our Western society came from unions. They did not come from the robber barons. Right? They came from the working man getting together just to get their best interest, and their best interests were fundamentally having a halfway decent life. Now, that is not what the oligarchs are all about. The oligarchs are about maximising power and profit, and the best way to do that is to collude with government in order to take away public rights and power. And one more point, what I have actually seen, right, is this inherent trend where you have corporate law and civil law.
Yes.
And corporate law has been given precedence over civil law, and I find that really quite disgusting. It's the next big danger for the working man.
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to leverage. Okay, so much of the political agenda that was represented by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, the sort of neoliberal period, was about removing the leverage of ordinary working people. So that, and the intellectual argument was that, people would be paid according to their value as priced in the market. But of course that wasn't, in my view, really the motivation. The motivation was to strip them of their power and pay them as little as they could. For some people that meant they actually got paid really well. Sectors that are in demand, for instance, IT professionals working for big banks and, large corporate enterprises, earned a shed load of money, as do many solicitors. But actually, the market position of most working people has been eroded ever since because of the decline, the emasculation of trade unions, and also the withdrawal of the social security safety net. So the mechanisms that draw income down to lower parts of the economy have been weakened, if not removed. Whereas all the mechanisms which draw up wealth, through increased profits and reduced payment and taxes and reduced responsibility for the costs of doing business, have actually been strengthened, which is why you now have a real economy which in many places is on its arse economically, and this super rich, unbelievably powerful corporate class that cannot be touched, is beyond the law.
Well, this is the whole point. They can be touched by a public that's actually interested in their own best interests and their own rights. However, we have all been led to believe that we should all be individuals in a marketplace, right?
Yes.
Vying with people, and that's all well and good if you're an intellectual or if you're highly intelligent and you're at the top of your game. That's brilliant, where your services are actually in demand. But for the fact of it is that 60 to 80% of any given population are not intellectuals. Yeah, they rely on fundamentally on lowbrow trades and work and so on and so forth. And this is highly dangerous, because what it means is that capitalism has this tendency for wealth to centralise.
The thing is, capitalism and capitalists often don't know what is best for them in the long term. There's interesting book called Saving Capitalism from the Capitalists. And basically, when you get that concentration of wealth, capitalism actually then stops functioning properly. It becomes like a sort of form of economic feudalism.
Yeah.
And in fact, you can see it in this country in that many people only have, the apparent wealth that they have because of debt. It's been financed by debt.
This is the reason for the upcoming recession. Upon recession, it's going to be a depression, definitely. The reason being that we are currently, most of us, are spending significant proportions of our income actually servicing a debt that we created in order to just continue life itself.
Indeed, debt was made. I mean, and this was the debt was
made necessary and then easily available.
Well, this was the genius of the whole sort of neoliberal enterprise, in that it actually made debt aspirational. People wanted mortgages, people wanted loans, and because actually even just the act of receiving, being bequeathed all of this money from a financial institution sort of validated who people were. But the other thing is, it was interesting you're talking about the ideology of individualism. That whole individualism is based on a negative definition of freedom. It's freedom from, not freedom to. So it's freedom from any sense of responsibility to those around you. And the problem is that actually this ideology has fragmented our communities.
Yeah.
I think that Britain, and I'm sure this is also the same in America, has become a horribly dysfunctional place in terms of communities. We don't know often what communities actually are, or certainly on an institutional level. This ideology of individualism, this negative definition of freedom, is no longer appropriate. We've gone too far towards this idea of the individual.
Yeah.
We need to get back a sense of responsibility, because if we don't, regardless of what happens to the poor, without that sense of responsibility, we are going to undercut our the natural capital that sustains our lives.
This is where civil disobedience, I think, comes into its own, because people can see civil disobedience as many things. I see it as highly organised, focused protests. Or you could look at the French thing, where basically they've just had to draft in 60,000 police officers and 450 people are in hospital, and they're throwing. There's different ways of protesting, but one thing that is most important is that there is a direct link between how your society works, how you're able to mitigate the problems of climate change, and how you're supposed to deal with social problems at the same time. Rich men will get together with other rich men to make themselves richer. That's just the way that it actually is. I expect nothing from them. What I expect is from the public. And I believe that the public is going to have to motivate itself, quite simply aim for the power, and then you diminish it from that point. I believe that it's the civic duty of all citizens to be aware of climate change, to be aware of the biosphere and our relationship to it, and also to each other as well.
Indeed, and as a direct consequence of that, we must fall back in love with collective action.
Absolutely.
We have to fall back in love with communities and actually, look at the bigger picture, because if we don't, we will all be poorer and our children will inherit a terrible world of contraction and misery.
We are all in this together.
We really are.
Even the oligarchs are in it with us. They just don't seem to realise that.
We're all in this together. I would quite like to think that David Cameron isn't. At some point, I'd quite like to see him and George Osborne catapulted into orbit. Anyway, bye for now. Thank you very much for watching.
See ya.